There is a garden outside Jerusalem. The hour is past midnight. The olive trees are black against a sky that has no moon. And into that garden comes a sound, the sound of 600 men moving in formation, torches cutting through the dark, swords and clubs, the clink of Roman armor. They have come for one man. He knows they are coming. He has been on his knees in that garden for the better part of an hour, and when he stands, his face is calm. He walks toward them. The officer in front calls out into the dark, "Whom do you seek?" "Jesus of Nazareth." And the man steps forward, and he says 2 words. 2 words, and 600 armed soldiers fall backward to the ground like cut wheat. We will come back to that garden. But to understand what happened in those 2 words, you have to go back. Not decades, not centuries. You have to go back more than 1,000 years to a mountain on the far side of a desert where a barefoot man is standing in front of a bush that is on fire and not burning up. His name is Moses, and he is about to ask God a question that no one had ever asked before. Here is what you need to understand about Moses in this moment. He is 80 years old. He has spent 40 years in Midian as a shepherd, which in the ancient world was one of the lowest social positions a man could hold. He was once a prince of Egypt. He was educated in the court of Pharaoh, trained in every art and science the most powerful civilization on earth could offer. And then he threw it all away, killed an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew slave, fled into the desert, and has been nobody ever since. He has no army. He has no title. He has a staff and a flock of sheep that belong to his father-in-law, and now God is speaking to him from a fire that should not be possible, telling him to go back to Egypt and demand the release of 2 million slaves from the most powerful ruler on earth. Moses does what any reasonable person would do. He pushes back. He asks questions. And then he asks the one question that will echo through every page of Scripture that comes after it. Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, "The God of your fathers has sent me to you." And they ask me, "What is his name?" Then what shall I tell them? And God answers. God says, "Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh." That is the Hebrew. And it is one of the most difficult phrases in all of Scripture to translate, because it does not behave like a normal name. The English versions typically render it, "I am who I am," or sometimes, "I will be what I will be." But neither translation fully captures what is happening here, because the word Ehyeh is not a noun. It is not a title. It is not a description. It is a verb. Pure being. Ongoing, uncontained, self-sustaining existence. Philo of Alexandria, the Jewish philosopher who was writing around the time of Jesus, spent pages trying to unpack this name. He said that God was essentially telling Moses, "I am the only thing that truly is." Everything else that exists, it borrows its existence from me. I do not borrow mine from anything. Think about that for a moment. Every other name in the ancient world told you something bounded. Zeus, ruler of the sky. Baal, lord of the storm. Ra, the sun. Every name had edges. Every name told you what the god controlled, what territory was his, where his power stopped. God's name has no edges. He does not say, "I am the God of thunder," or "I am the God of Israel," though he is both. He says, "I am." Full stop. No predicate. No object. No limits. Just existence itself, speaking from a bush on fire. And then, here is the part that most people read past. He gives Moses a second name. He says, "Say this to the people of Israel. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations." The word translated Lord in your English Bible, in capital letters, is the Hebrew YHWH, the Tetragrammaton. It is the third-person form of the same verb. Ehyeh is first person. I am. YHWH is third person. He is. The same root. The same claim. One spoken by God about himself. One spoken by Israel about God. Stay with me, because this matters for everything that comes later. Moses goes back to Egypt. The plagues come. The sea splits. The people march through the desert. And for 14 centuries, that name sits at the center of Israel's worship, written in special ink by scribes who would not pronounce it aloud, who would wash their hands before and after writing it, who considered it too holy to say. For 1400 years, no human being claims that name for himself. And then a carpenter from Galilee walks into the temple court in Jerusalem. Now, before we get there, you need to understand something about your own life, because this is not just ancient history. You have been asked the question, who are you, more times than you can count, by parents, by teachers, by the culture you grew up in. And if you are honest, there have been moments when you did not know the answer. Moments when the ground shifted and the thing you had built your identity on, a career, a relationship, a version of yourself you believed in, disappeared. Moses had that moment too. He was nobody at a burning bush, and God gave him a name to stand on that was bigger than his own. Not Moses' name, God's name. Pay attention to this, because that is the whole structure of what is coming. It is the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, the Portico of Solomon. Winter. The crowds are thick, and the tension between Jesus and the religious leaders has been building for months. Sharp exchanges in the temple courts, accusations flying in both directions. A group of Pharisees corners him. They want a direct answer. How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Jesus gives them an answer they are not prepared for. He talks about his sheep. He talks about the Father. And then he says something that stops the conversation cold. I and the Father are one. They pick up stones, right there in the temple. Jesus talks them back from the edge, asks them which of his works deserves death. The moment passes, but earlier in John's Gospel, Jesus says something even more direct. The Pharisees are pressing him about Abraham. You are not yet 50 years old, they say, and you have seen Abraham? They mean it as an insult. They are saying, who do you think you are? And Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. The Greek is ego eimi, 2 words. And if you know your Greek, you know that in Greek, a sentence does not need a subject. The verb already contains it. When Jesus says ego eimi, he is adding the subject word ego, I, for emphasis. He is not saying, I am he, or I am the one. He is saying, I am. No predicate, no completion. The same unfinished, uncontained, edgeless verb that God spoke to Moses from the fire. The crowd does not miss it. They do not say, that is an interesting theological claim. They pick up stones to kill him. Here is what most people miss about this moment. In Jewish law, blasphemy, claiming to be God, was a capital offense. These men were not overreacting by the standards of their world. If Jesus was a human being making a claim to the divine name, they were right to be horrified. The only way this moment makes sense, on either side of it, is if everyone in that courtyard understood exactly what he was saying. He said it again and again across the Gospel of John. 7 times he completes the phrase with a predicate that unpacks what the name means in his own body. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. 7 statements, 7 images, each one a different angle on the same claim. The woman at the well in Samaria, sitting at Jacob's well in the heat of midday, a woman who has had 5 husbands and whose current situation is one she would rather not discuss. She says to Jesus, "I know that Messiah is coming. When he comes, he will tell us all things." And Jesus says to her, in Greek, just 2 words, ego eimi, I am, the one who is speaking to you, too. No crowd, no temple court, no religious leaders watching, just a woman who needed water, and the God of the burning bush sitting on the edge of a well, speaking his own name to her. And she ran. She left her water jar behind and ran back into the city and said to everyone who would listen, "Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did." She did not say, "Come meet an interesting teacher." She said, Come and see." Because something had just happened at that well that she did not have categories for, and the only thing she knew was that she could not keep it to herself. Before we get to the garden, there is one more voice you need to hear. 700 years before Jesus stands at Jacob's well, the prophet Isaiah is writing to a people who have lost everything. The northern kingdom has fallen to Assyria. The southern kingdom is heading toward Babylon. The temple is about to be destroyed. The covenant seems broken. God seems absent. And into that silence, God speaks through Isaiah. Chapter 43. "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." And then, a few verses later, I am the Lord, and besides me there is no Savior. The Hebrew there, ani waichatwach, is emphatic double repetition. I am the Lord. As if God is leaning forward into the silence of the exile, as if the redundancy is the point. I am not distant. I have not left. I have not finished. Now watch what happens. The name moves through the centuries like a thread pulled through everything. Moses at the burning bush, Isaiah in the exile, Jesus in the temple court, Jesus at the well, and now, the garden. Again, it is Passover week. Jesus has been in Jerusalem for days, and the pressure has been building towards something that everyone can feel, but no one can name. He takes his disciples to a garden called Gethsemane on the slope of the Mount of Olives. He prays. He sweats. He asks once if the cup can pass. And then he says, "Not my will, but yours." He stands up. And in the torchlight, a crowd appears. Judas Iscariot leads them in. The Gospel of John says there was a spera, a Roman cohort, along with officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees. A full Roman cohort was 600 men. John mentions this detail and moves on, as if it is unremarkable. But you should stop and let that number land. 600 soldiers, armed, torches, swords and clubs, sent to arrest one man. Either the chief priests were terrified of this man, or they understood something about him that required 600 soldiers as a precaution. Maybe both are true. Judas comes forward. He greets Jesus with a kiss, the signal they had agreed on. And the officer steps forward and says, "Whom do you seek?" "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus says, "Ego eimi, I am." The English translations add the word he. I am he. Because a sentence without a predicate feels grammatically incomplete in English, but the Greek has no he. John wrote 2 words, the same 2 words Jesus used in the temple court, the same 2 words God used at the burning bush. And here is what happens next. John records it without commentary, without explanation, as if it is simply what occurred. When Jesus said, "I am," they drew back and fell to the ground. All of them. 600 men with weapons, and they fell backward. They did not stumble. They did not retreat. The Greek is apelthan eis ta opiso kai epison chamai. They went back and they fell to the ground. Past tense, completed action. The whole cohort, down. There is no natural explanation for what happened in that garden at that moment. A man spoke 2 words, and the force of those words, or the one behind them, put 600 soldiers on the ground. But here is the thing that should break your heart and put you back together at the same time. Jesus does not run. He does not disappear into the olive trees. He asks them again, "Whom do you seek?" They say again, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he says again, "Ego eimi, I am." And then he adds, "So, if you seek me, let these men go." Protecting his disciples while the soldiers pick themselves off the ground, he lets them arrest him. The God of the burning bush, who spoke 2 words and flattened 600 armed men, extends his hands for the ropes, not because he had to, because he chose to. Josephus, writing just decades after these events, describes the chaos of the Passover period in Jerusalem. The crowds, the soldiers, the religious tension that turned that city into something ready to fracture. He writes as an outsider, a Jewish historian working under Roman patronage with no interest in making theological arguments. And even Josephus records the power and the fear that surrounded this figure in those final days. Something happened in that city that left marks in secular history. But John is not interested in secular history at this point. John is interested in one thing, that the same voice that spoke from the fire at Horeb, that said Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh into Moses' fear, that said Ani Ani Yhdyuch into Israel's exile, that voice walked into a garden and said 2 words that the whole created order recognized before the soldiers' minds could catch up with what had happened to their legs. And then let itself be bound. So, 3 things to take from all of this. The first is this: God's name is not a piece of information. It is an invitation into a way of seeing reality. When Moses asked, "What is your name?" he was asking what every human being eventually asks. Is there anything out there that is actually stable? Is there a ground under the ground? And the answer came back, "I am." Not "I was" or "I will be," though both are also true, but "I am." Present tense, always present tense. The God of Abraham did not finish existing when Abraham died. He is not a memory. He is not a force. He is a being who is, right now, as you watch this, as you breathe. The second is harder. Every time Jesus said ego eimi in the Gospel of John, he was not making an abstract theological argument. He was telling you something personal. I am the bread when you are hungry. I am the light when you are lost. I am the door when you cannot find a way in. I am the shepherd when you are scattered. I am the resurrection when the thing you love most has died. I am the way when every other road has run out. I am the vine, and the only thing required of you is to stay connected. Each of those 7 statements was spoken to a specific person in a specific crisis. The bread statement came after 5,000 people had no food. The light statement came after a man had been blind since birth. The resurrection statement came while a woman was standing in front of her brother's tomb. These are not doctrines delivered in a lecture hall. These are 2 words spoken into the worst moment, over and over again, by the one who spoke them at the burning bush. The third takeaway, and this is the one I want to leave you with. In that garden at midnight, 600 men came for Jesus with weapons and torches, and he said 2 words, and they fell to the ground. And then he let them arrest him anyway. That is not the behavior of a man who was overpowered. That is the behavior of a man who chose. Every step of what came after, the trials, the beatings, the cross, was chosen by the same one who flattened a Roman cohort with his breath. The cross was not a defeat. The cross was I am, choosing to become the door. If this video helped you see something in the text that you had not seen before, share it with someone who has been asking questions about who Jesus actually is. And if you have questions of your own, drop them in the comments. I read them all. There is a garden outside Jerusalem. Midnight. 600 soldiers. And a man who knew exactly what he was doing walks toward them and speaks 2 words. 2 words that the universe recognized before the soldiers even hit the ground. I am